The dust had barely settled from the Army patrol when Katherine Ellis realized her entire world had just crumbled to ash and memory. She stood in front of what remained of her father's trading post, a charred skeleton of timber and stone that still smoked in the afternoon heat. Chloride. Arizona had seen its share of troubles in this year of 1878, but nothing had prepared Katherine for the sight of everything she had ever known reduced to blackened rubble. Her father lay buried on the hillside now, killed 3 days ago when a gang of outlaws had ridden through, torching buildings and shooting anyone who resisted. The townspeople had helped her bury him, their faces grim with the knowledge that lawlessness still ruled these territories despite the Army's promises of protection. Katherine was 22 years old, orphaned, and according to the stern-faced Army captain who had just arrived with his patrol, she had no legal right to remain on this land. The property deed had been in her father's name, and without a husband or male relative to claim it, the land would revert to territorial holdings. Captain Morrison had delivered this news with all the warmth of a winter stone, his pale eyes never quite meeting hers as he informed her she had until sundown to gather what belongings she could salvage and leave. "You cannot be serious," Katherine had said, her voice shaking with barely controlled fury. "My father built this trading post with his own hands. I have worked beside him for 15 years. This is my home." "The law is the law, Miss Ellis," Captain Morrison replied, adjusting his blue uniform jacket. "A woman alone cannot hold property rights in this territory. You will need to find family elsewhere or seek employment in a more suitable location, perhaps back east." "I have no family back east." "I have no family anywhere." Katherine's hands clenched into fists at her sides. "Where exactly do you expect me to go?" The captain's expression remained unmoved. "That is not the Army's concern. We are here to maintain order and enforce territorial law. You have until sunset." It was then that a voice rang out across the dusty street, deep and carrying a tone of absolute authority despite its casual drawl. "Now that is about the biggest load of horseshit I have heard all month, Captain, and I have been listening to politicians in Prescott." Katherine turned to see a man stepping down from the wooden walkway in front of the saloon. He was tall and broad-shouldered, wearing dusty leather chaps over dark trousers, a worn shirt that had once been blue, and a wide-brimmed hat that shadowed his face. As he approached, she could see he was perhaps 28 or 30, with several days of dark stubble on his strong jaw and eyes the color of aged whiskey that held both intelligence and danger. Captain Morrison's face flushed red. "This is Army business, Cowboy. Move along." "Xavier Anderson," the man said, stopping a few feet from the captain. "I own the Triple Ranch about 10 miles north of here, and I am making this my business because what you are doing is wrong, and everyone in this town knows it." "The law is clear," Morrison insisted, his hand moving toward his sidearm. Xavier's expression did not change, but something in his stance shifted, became more dangerous. Katherine noticed several other men had emerged from the saloon and the general store, watching the confrontation with obvious interest. "The law says a woman cannot hold property alone," Xavier said, his voice even. "It does not say the Army can just kick her off land her family owned. There are procedures, appeals, time requirements. You are not a judge, Captain. You do not have the authority to evict her." "I have the authority granted by the territorial governor to maintain order and prevent vagrancy," Morrison shot back. "Vagrancy." Xavier took another step forward, and despite being outnumbered by the 6 soldiers behind Morrison, he somehow seemed to command the space. "This woman has more right to be here than you do, Captain. Her father traded fairly with everyone in this territory, Apache and white alike." He helped build this town when it was nothing but a mining camp and a prayer. You rode in here yesterday and think you can just erase that." Katherine found herself staring at this stranger who had appeared like something out of a dime novel to defend her. She had seen him around town a few times, knew he ran cattle and kept to himself mostly, but they had never exchanged more than a polite greeting. Now he stood between her and the full authority of the United States Army as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "I will ask you one more time to stand aside," Morrison said, his voice tight with anger. "No." Xavier crossed his arms over his chest. "You want to force her off this land, you will have to go through me. And then you will have to explain to your commanding officer why you started a shooting war with local ranchers over a legal matter that should be handled in court." The tension stretched, so thin, Katherine thought she could hear it humming in the desert air. Morrison's soldiers shifted uneasily, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. The townspeople watching from doorways and windows had grown in number, and Katherine realized with a start that public opinion had swung decidedly against the army captain. Finally, Morrison took a step back. "This is not over," he said, directing his words at Katherine but glaring at Xavier. "I will be writing to the territorial court in Prescott. If you are still here when I receive orders, you will be removed by force if necessary." "You do that," Xavier said calmly. "And while you are writing letters, Miss Ellis will be consulting with a lawyer about her legal options. Seems to me territorial law has provisions for women to inherit property under certain circumstances, especially in cases of violent death." Morrison looked like he wanted to say more, but instead he jerked his head at his men and strode toward their horses. Within minutes, the patrol was riding out of Chloride, leaving dust and the echo of hoofbeats behind them. Katherine let out a breath she had not realized she was holding. Her legs felt suddenly weak, and she had to lock her knees to keep from swaying. "Thank you," she managed, looking up at Xavier. "I do not know what would have happened if you had not intervened." Xavier removed his hat, revealing dark hair that curled slightly at his collar. His face was weathered by sun and wind, but there was a gentleness in his eyes that surprised her. "Morrison is a bully and a fool," he said. "He has been making trouble since he got assigned to this territory. Thinks frontier justice means he can do whatever he pleases. Still, you took a real risk standing up to him like that. Could not stand by and watch him throw you off your own land." Xavier glanced at the ruined trading post. "I am sorry about your father. Thomas Ellis was a good man." Tears threatened at the corners of Katherine's eyes, but she blinked them back. She had cried enough over the past 3 days. "He was," she agreed softly, "and he would have hated seeing his life's work taken away because of some bureaucratic nonsense." "It is not going to happen," Xavier said with quiet conviction. "We will find a way to make sure you keep this property." Katherine raised an eyebrow. A faint smile crossed Xavier's face, the first she had seen from him. It transformed his harsh features, making him look younger and considerably more approachable. "I meant what I said to Morrison. I am making this my business, if that is all right with you, Miss Ellis." Katherine looked at this stranger who had just upended his own life to defend hers, and something warm uncurled in her chest. "It is all right with me," she said. "And please call me Katherine. Katherine." The way he said her name, careful and respectful, made that warmth spread further. "I am Xavier. Let me help you see what can be salvaged from the trading post. Then we need to figure out our next steps." They spent the rest of the afternoon picking through the ruins. Most of the building's contents had been destroyed by fire, but Katherine managed to recover a few precious items from what had been her father's office. A strong box with some money and important papers that had survived the blaze. She also found her mother's wedding ring, miraculously intact inside a ceramic dish that had somehow escaped the flames. Xavier worked beside her without complaint, his strong hands lifting charred beams and clearing debris. He treated each recovered item with respect, understanding that these were not just objects, but pieces of her life and history. As the sun began its descent toward the jagged mountains on the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, Katherine realized she felt less alone than she had since her father's death. "You should not stay here tonight," Xavier said, as they stood surveying their work. "The building is not safe, and those outlaws might come back." Katherine had been trying not to think about that possibility. "I have been sleeping at the boarding house," she admitted. "Mrs. Chen has been kind enough to let me have a room on credit until I can sort out my father's affairs." "Good." Xavier dusted off his hands on his chaps. "I am going to ride back to my ranch, but I will be back in town tomorrow morning. We should visit Walter Grant, the lawyer who handles most of the legal work around here. He might know of precedents or loopholes that can help your case." "I cannot afford to pay you for your time," Katherine said, hating how the words tasted like failure. Xavier's expression softened. "I am not asking for payment, Katherine. I am offering help because it is the right thing to do." He paused, then added, "And because I have seen too many good people pushed around by those who think power gives them the right to be cruel. Your father helped me when I first came to this territory 5 years ago, gave me fair prices and honest dealing when others tried to cheat a newcomer. I owe him, and now I am paying that debt to his daughter." Katherine felt her throat tighten with emotion. "I remember that," she said quietly. "You came in looking for supplies to start your ranch. My father said you had an honest face. He had good instincts." Xavier settled his hat back on his head. "Get some rest tonight. Tomorrow we start fighting back properly." As Katherine watched him mount his horse and ride out of town, she felt something shift inside her. For the first time in days, she felt a flicker of hope, and underneath that, something else she could not quite name. It was the feeling of being seen, of being valued, of having someone stand beside her when the whole world seemed determined to push her down. The next morning dawned clear and hot, as most mornings did in Arizona. Katherine was up early, washing her face in the basin at the boarding house and putting on her most respectable dress, a dark blue calico that she usually reserved for church. If they were going to see a lawyer, she wanted to look serious and competent, not like the desperate orphan she felt like inside. She had just finished pinning her dark blonde hair into a neat bun when she heard the sound of horses outside. Looking through the window, she saw Xavier had returned, and he had not come alone. 2 other men sat on horses beside him, both dressed in range clothes but with an air of respectability about them. Katherine hurried downstairs and out onto the wooden walkway. Xavier dismounted and nodded to her, his eyes taking in her appearance with what might have been approval. "Morning, Katherine. I brought some friends who wanted to meet you. This is Robert Hutchinson, owns the Bar H Ranch south of town, and James Mercer, who runs the freight business between here and Prescott." Both men tipped their hats to her. Hutchinson was older, perhaps 50, with gray streaking his dark hair and a weathered, kind face. Mercer was closer to Xavier's age, stocky and red-haired with an open, honest expression. "Miss Ellis," Hutchinson said, "Xavier told us about your troubles with Captain Morrison. We wanted you to know you have support in this community. Your father was respected by everyone who knew him, and we do not take kindly to the army trying to steal land from one of our own." Katherine felt overwhelmed by this unexpected show of solidarity. "Thank you," she managed. "That means more than I can say." "We have been talking," Mercer added, "and we think there might be a way to help you keep your property, at least until the legal situation is sorted out. But we should discuss it with Walter Grant first, make sure we are not making things worse. The 5 of them, including Mrs. Chen, who had come out to see what the commotion was about, walked together to Grant's office above the general store. The lawyer was a thin, scholarly-looking man in his 40s with wire-rimmed spectacles, and an impressive library of law books lining his office walls. He listened carefully as Xavier explained the situation, his expression growing more thoughtful with each detail. Morrison was overstepping his authority, Grant said finally, leaning back in his chair. The Army cannot simply evict someone without a court order, regardless of the property ownership situation. However, he is correct that territorial law does present complications for a woman inheriting property without a male relative. What are Catherine's options? Xavier asked, leaning forward intently. Grant steepled his fingers. There are a few possibilities. First, she could petition the territorial court for an exception based on the violent circumstances of her father's death and her role in running the trading post. That would take time, possibly months, and the outcome is uncertain. Second, she could sell the property quickly to someone who would allow her to continue operating the trading post as a tenant or partner. Third, he paused, looking uncomfortable. Third, Katherine prompted. Third, she could marry. A husband would have the legal standing to claim the property, and if the marriage was entered into with the specific purpose of preserving your inheritance, it would be a practical solution. The room fell silent. Katherine felt heat rising to her cheeks. I am not going to marry someone just to keep my land, she said firmly. That would be little better than selling myself. No one is suggesting that, Xavier said quickly, though something in his expression had changed, become more guarded. Let us focus on the legal options. Walter, can you file a petition with the territorial court on Catherine's behalf? I can and I will, Grant agreed. But I need to be honest with you, Miss Ellis. The courts move slowly, and they tend to favor traditional interpretations of the law. Your chances of success are perhaps 30% at best. Catherine's hope, so fragile and new, began to crack. So I am going to lose everything my father built. Not if we can delay things long enough, Hutchinson interjected. The Army cannot force you off while there is an active legal proceeding. And territorial law also states that property cannot be seized if it would create undue hardship. If you can demonstrate that you are actively using the property for commerce and that eviction would leave you destitute, that creates another layer of legal protection. But the trading post burned down, Katherine pointed out. How can I demonstrate active commerce? You rebuild it, Mercer said simply. We all pitch in, get the structure back up and operational. Once you are conducting business again, your legal position strengthens considerably. Xavier was nodding slowly. That could work. Morrison will not be able to get a court order quickly, especially if Walter is filing appeals and objections at every step. That buys us time. Time for what, though? Katherine asked. Even if we delay for months, eventually the court is going to rule, and if they rule against me, all we have done is postpone the inevitable. Grant removed his spectacles and polished them thoughtfully. In my experience, Miss Ellis, the law is often less about absolute right and wrong than it is about who has the better argument and the more persistent advocate. If you can show the court that you are a productive member of this community, that removing you from your property would serve no public good and would in fact harm local commerce, if you can demonstrate that your father intended for you to inherit and that you are fully capable of managing the property, then you have a fighting chance. It is not a guarantee, but it is a chance. Katherine looked around at the faces of these men who had rallied to her cause, men who barely knew her, but were willing to fight for her right to exist in this harsh territory. Her gaze lingered longest on Xavier, whose quiet strength seemed to anchor the room. "Then we rebuild," she said, lifting her chin. "And we fight." The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of activity. True to their word, Hutchinson, Mercer, and Xavier rallied the community of Chloride to help Katherine rebuild the trading post. It seemed her father's kindness and fair dealing had touched more people than she had realized. Ranchers, miners, townspeople, even some of the Apache families who had traded with her father came to help with the construction. Xavier was there every day from dawn until dusk, his shirt soaked with sweat as he hauled timber and hammered nails. Katherine worked alongside everyone, her hands blistering and her muscles aching, but she refused to be seen as someone who needed to be rescued. She was fighting for her future, and she would do it with every ounce of strength she possessed. During the long days of work, Katherine found herself increasingly aware of Xavier's presence. She noticed the careful way he handled the tools, the patience he showed when teaching her how to frame a wall properly, the quiet competence that seemed to define everything he did. She noticed, too, the way he always seemed to be nearby when she needed help lifting something heavy, the way he saved her the last cup of water from his canteen during the hottest part of the afternoon, the way his eyes would seek her out across the construction site as if to make sure she was all right. One evening, after most of the workers had gone home, Katherine and Xavier stood together looking at the progress they had made. The frame of the new trading post stood sturdy and square, and the roof would go on tomorrow. It was smaller than the original building, but it was solid and well built, a testament to community effort and determination. "It is going to be beautiful," Katherine said softly. "Different from what my father built, but still mine." "Yours," Xavier agreed. He was standing close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body in the cooling evening air. "You have worked harder than anyone, Katherine. Your father would be proud." She turned to look at him, and something in the fading light made her bold. "Why are you doing this, Xavier? And please do not tell me it is just about repaying a debt to my father. You have already done that 10 times over." Xavier was quiet for a long moment, his eyes searching her face. When he spoke, his voice was low and careful, as if he were choosing each word with precision. "At first, it was about your father and about standing up to Morrison's bullying. But these past 2 weeks, working beside you, seeing your strength and determination, the way you never complain or give up even when things are hardest. Katherine, I am doing this because I believe in you. And because He stopped, seeming to wrestle with something internal. "Because you what?" Katherine prompted, her heart suddenly beating faster. "Because I care about what happens to you," Xavier finished. "More than I probably should, given we have only really known each other for 2 weeks. But there it is. I care about you, Katherine Ellis, and I want to see you win this fight." Katherine felt as if all the air had been sucked from her lungs. She had felt the growing connection between them, the way simple touches seemed to linger, the way conversations stretched longer than necessary, but hearing him say it out loud made it real in a way that both thrilled and terrified her. "I care about you too," she said quietly. "You make me feel like I am not alone in this, like someone sees me as more than just a problem to be solved." Xavier reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted to, and brushed a strand of hair back from her face. His fingers were calloused and gentle, and Katherine felt heat flood through her at the simple contact. "You are definitely not a problem," he said, a hint of humor warming his voice. "Stubborn, maybe. Independent to a fault, certainly, but never a problem." Katherine found herself smiling despite the seriousness of their situation. Stubborn and independent, that sounds like an insult dressed up as a compliment. It is the highest compliment I know how to give." Xavier's hand lingered near her face, and Katherine felt herself swaying closer to him, drawn by something stronger than logic or propriety. The moment stretched between them, full of possibility and promise. Then the sound of approaching horses broke the spell, and they stepped apart as a group of miners rode past, calling out friendly goodnights. Xavier tipped his hat to them, and Katherine forced herself to breathe normally, though her pulse was racing. "I should get back to the boarding house," she said, not quite meeting his eyes. "Mrs. Chen will have dinner waiting." "I will walk you there," Xavier offered, and they made their way through the dusty streets of Chloride as the first stars began to appear in the darkening sky. At the door of the boarding house, Xavier paused. "Tomorrow we put the roof on," he said. "After that it is just finishing work and stocking inventory. You are going to make it, Katherine. No matter what Morrison or the courts throw at you, you are going to be fine." "We are going to make it," Katherine corrected gently. "I could not do this without you, Xavier." Something fierce and protective flashed in his eyes. "You will never have to," he said. Then, as if the words had surprised him as much as they surprised her, he touched his hat brim and headed back toward where his horse was tied. Katherine went inside feeling as if she were floating. "Mrs. Chen took one look at her face and smiled knowingly, but said nothing. Just served dinner and made quiet conversation about the weather. That night, Katherine lay in her narrow boarding house bed and let herself imagine a future that included Xavier Anderson, a future where she was not alone against the world. The trading post reopened 3 weeks after Captain Morrison had tried to evict Katherine. It was a moment of triumph, marred only by the news that Morrison had indeed filed a complaint with the territorial court seeking her removal from the property. Walter Grant immediately filed a counterclaim and a request for a hearing, beginning what he warned could be a lengthy legal battle. Katherine threw herself into running the trading post with determined energy. She proved herself to be as shrewd a businesswoman as her father had been, negotiating fair prices with the local ranchers and miners while maintaining good relationships with the Apache traders who came through. Word spread that Thomas Ellis's daughter was carrying on his legacy of honest dealing, and business was brisk. Xavier continued to find reasons to come to town several times a week. He always needed supplies, or he had business with the lawyer, or he wanted to check on the structural integrity of the new building. Katherine knew these were excuses and did not care. She looked forward to his visits with an eagerness that both delighted and frightened her. They fell into a pattern of sorts. Xavier would arrive in the afternoon, help Katherine with any heavy work that needed doing, and then they would sit together on the bench outside the trading post as the day cooled, talking about everything and nothing. He told her about his ranch, about the challenges of raising cattle in this unforgiving territory, about his dreams of building something lasting. She told him about growing up in the trading post, about her mother who had died when she was 7, about the books she loved to read, and the places she imagined visiting someday. It was during one of these conversations, about 6 weeks after they had first met, that Xavier said something that changed everything. They had been talking about the upcoming autumn, about how the weather would cool and make work easier, when he suddenly went quiet. Katherine looked over to find him watching her with an expression she could not quite decipher. "What is it?" she asked. Xavier took a breath, as if steeling himself. "I have been thinking about something Walter Grant said about your legal options. And I know you said you would not marry just to keep your land, and I respect that. But Katherine, what if it was not just about the land? What if it was also about 2 people who care for each other and want to build a life together?" Katherine's heart began to pound so hard she was certain he could hear it. "Xavier, What are you saying? He turned to face her fully, taking her hand in both of his. His touch was warm and slightly rough, and Katherine realized this was the first time they had truly held hands. I am saying that I have fallen in love with you, Katherine Ellis. I am saying that I wake up thinking about you and go to sleep remembering the sound of your laugh. I am saying that these past 2 months have been the best of my life, even with all the troubles and uncertainties, because I got to spend them with you. And I am saying that if you feel even a fraction of what I feel, then maybe we should consider that marriage would not just solve your legal problems, it would be the start of something we both want. Tears sprang to Katherine's eyes, but they were not tears of sadness. You love me, she whispered. With everything I have, Xavier confirmed. His voice was steady, but she could see the vulnerability in his eyes, the fear that she might reject him. I know this is fast. I know we have only known each other for 2 months, but out here, time works differently. We have been through fire together, literally and figuratively. I know your strength, your kindness, your determination. I know you snore a little when you are really tired because I have heard you napping on that bench there after a long day. I know you are afraid of spiders, but you will face down an angry drunk without flinching. I know you, Katherine, and I love what I know. Katherine let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. I do not snore, she protested weakly, even as she was processing the enormity of what he had just said. You do, but it is cute, Xavier said with a small smile. Then his expression turned serious again. I am not asking you to answer me right now. I know this is sudden and I do not want you to feel pressured. But I wanted you to know how I feel, and that if you decided you wanted to marry me, it would not be just a legal convenience. It would be real, Katherine. It would be me promising to stand by you for the rest of my life, because I cannot imagine my life without you in it anymore. Katherine looked down at their joined hands, at the way his fingers wrapped around hers like a promise. She thought about the past 2 months, about how Xavier had appeared in her darkest moment and had never wavered in his support. She thought about the way her heart lifted every time she saw him ride into town, about how his presence had become as necessary to her as breathing. She thought about the future, about all the uncertain days ahead, and realized that the only thing she was certain of was that she wanted to face them with this man beside her. Xavier, she said slowly, lifting her eyes to meet his, I am not going to make you wait for an answer because I already know what it is. She saw hope flare in his expression. I love you too. I think I started falling for you the moment you stood up to Captain Morrison, and I have been falling ever since. You make me feel safe and seen and valued. You make me laugh even on the hardest days. You have given me hope when I thought everything was lost. So yes, I want to marry you, not just to save my land, but because I want to build a life with you. I want to wake up next to you and face whatever challenges come our way together. I want everything with you, Xavier Anderson. For a moment, Xavier just stared at her as if he could not quite believe what he had heard. Then he let out a whoop of joy that startled a nearby horse and pulled Katherine into his arms, lifting her right off the bench. She laughed, wrapping her arms around his neck, and when he set her down, his lips found hers in a kiss that was gentle and passionate and full of promise all at once. Katherine had been kissed before, a few fumbling attempts by ranch hands who thought the trader's daughter might be interested. Those experiences had left her cold and unimpressed. This was different. This was Xavier, and kissing him felt like coming home and setting out on an adventure at the same time. His hands cupped her face with infinite care, and she pressed closer, wanting to memorize every detail of this moment. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, Xavier rested his forehead against hers. We should probably tell Walter to add a wedding to our legal strategy, he said, and the practical statement in the midst of such emotion made Katherine laugh. "Very romantic," she teased. "I will be more romantic later," Xavier promised. "Right now I am just trying to remember how to think with you looking at me like that." "Like what?" "Like I am everything you ever wanted." Katherine reached up to trace the line of his jaw, feeling the rasp of stubble under her fingers. "You are," she said simply. "Maybe not what I thought I wanted, but definitely what I needed, what I still need." They were married 3 days later in a simple ceremony at the small church on the edge of Chloride. Walter Grant had immediately filed papers with the territorial court announcing the marriage and Katherine's new legal status as a married woman, whose property was now jointly held with her husband. It was a tactical move as much as a romantic one, but Katherine did not care about the legal maneuvering. She cared about the way Xavier looked at her as she walked down the aisle in her mother's carefully preserved wedding dress, which Mrs. Chen had helped her alter to fit. She cared about the way his voice shook slightly as he spoke his vows, promising to love and honor her for all his days. She cared about the feel of the simple gold band he slipped onto her finger, a ring he had ridden all the way to Prescott to purchase. The whole town turned out for the wedding, filling the small church to capacity. Even some of the Apache families who traded with Katherine came, standing respectfully at the back and nodding their approval. It felt like a community celebration, a collective statement that Katherine Ellis Anderson belonged here and always would. Captain Morrison was notably absent, which suited everyone just fine. After the ceremony, there was a celebration at the saloon, with music and dancing and more food than Katherine had seen since before her father's death. Xavier kept her close all evening, his hand warm at the small of her back, his eyes never straying far from her face. When someone called for the bride and groom to dance, he led her out onto the cleared floor with surprising grace for a rancher. "I did not know you could dance," Katherine said as he swept her into a waltz. "My mother insisted I learn," Xavier replied. "Said a gentleman should know how to properly escort a lady around a dance floor. I complained at the time, but right now I am very grateful for those lessons." "Where is your mother now?" Katherine asked. She realized there was still so much she did not know about his past, about the life he had lived before coming to Arizona. A shadow crossed Xavier's face. "She died about 7 years ago, back in Texas. Fever took her and my father both within a week of each other. That is why I came out here, actually. Could not stand to stay on their land without them, so I sold everything and headed west to start over." Katherine squeezed his hand, understanding that kind of loss all too well. "I am sorry. I wish I could have met them." "They would have loved you," Xavier said with certainty. "My mother especially. She always said I needed a woman with spirit and strength, someone who would not just follow along but would challenge me and stand beside me as an equal. You are everything she hoped I would find." "Then I wish I could have thanked her for raising such a good man," Katherine said softly. They danced until Katherine's feet ached and her face hurt from smiling. Finally, as the evening wound down, Xavier borrowed a wagon from Robert Hutchinson and drove Katherine out to the Triple Ranch for the first time. She had never seen his home, had never ventured that far out of Chloride since his dramatic intervention in her life. The ranch house was larger than she expected, a sturdy structure of timber and stone that sat in a small valley with a stream running nearby. In the moonlight, she could see the corrals and outbuildings, the dark shapes of cattle grazing on the hillsides. It was beautiful and remote, a place carved out of wilderness through hard work and determination. "Welcome home," Xavier said as he helped her down from the wagon. The words made Katherine's eyes sting with sudden emotion. Home. She had thought she had lost that forever when her father died and the trading post burned. Now here was Xavier, offering her a new home, a new life, a new chance at happiness. The inside of the ranch house was simple but comfortable, with sturdy furniture and a large stone fireplace that would be welcome when winter came. Xavier had clearly tried to tidy up before the wedding, but there was still a charmingly masculine disorder to the place. Stacks of books about ranching, a half-repaired saddle in the corner, dishes in the sink. "I know it is not much," Xavier started, but Katherine cut him off with a kiss. "It is perfect," she said when they broke apart. "It is ours, and that makes it perfect." Xavier's eyes darkened with emotion and something else, something that made Katherine's pulse quicken. "Katherine," he said, his voice rough, "are you sure about this, about me, about all of it? Because if you have any doubts, we can wait, we can take our time." She silenced him with another kiss, this one deeper and more insistent. When she pulled back, she was breathing hard. "I have no doubts," she said firmly. "I want this. I want you. I want to start our life together right now, tonight." What followed was tender and passionate, awkward in moments as they learned each other's bodies and preferences, but ultimately beautiful in a way Katherine had never imagined. Xavier was patient and attentive, making sure she felt safe and cherished every moment. When they finally lay tangled together in his bed, now their bed, Katherine felt a completeness she had never known before, as if a piece of herself she had not known was missing had suddenly clicked into place. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness, her head resting on Xavier's chest so she could hear the steady beat of his heart. "I love you too," Xavier replied, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "More than I thought it was possible to love someone. You are my partner now, Katherine, in everything. The ranch, the trading post, whatever challenges come our way, we face them together." "Together," Katherine echoed and fell asleep with a smile on her lips. The next few months were a period of adjustment and joy. Katherine split her time between the ranch and the trading post, with Xavier helping her find a reliable manager named Sarah Collins, a widow from Prescott who needed work, and proved to be excellent at running the day-to-day operations. This allowed Katherine to spend more time at the ranch, learning about cattle and horses and the rhythm of ranch life. She discovered she loved it. The wide, open spaces, the hard physical work, the satisfaction of seeing cattle thrive under their care. Xavier was an excellent teacher, patient with her mistakes and generous with his praise when she succeeded. They worked side by side during the days and fell into each other's arms at night, building a partnership that was equal parts practical and passionate. The legal battle over Katherine's inheritance continued to drag through the territorial courts. Captain Morrison, it seemed, had made Katherine's eviction a personal crusade, filing objection after objection and calling in favors to keep the case alive. Walter Grant fought back with equal determination, filing motions and appeals, and generally making himself such a nuisance to the court that the judge finally agreed to hear the case in person rather than ruling on paperwork alone. The hearing was scheduled for early December in Prescott. Katherine and Xavier made the trip together, along with Walter Grant, and a stack of documentation proving Katherine's competence and the legitimacy of her claim to the property. They also brought letters of support from dozens of Chloride residents, Apache traders and local business owners, all testifying to Katherine's character and the importance of the trading post to the community. Captain Morrison was there, of course, stiff and formal in his uniform. He presented his case with military precision, arguing that territorial law was clear and that exceptions created dangerous precedents. He made Katherine sound like a grasping opportunist rather than a grieving daughter fighting for her birthright. When it was their turn, Walter Grant methodically dismantled Morrison's arguments. He pointed out that Katherine had been operating the trading post successfully for months, that she had the support of the entire community, that her marriage to Xavier Anderson had resolved any legal concerns about property management, and that forcing her off the land would serve no purpose except to satisfy Morrison's spite. Then Grant did something unexpected. He called Xavier to testify. Xavier stood before the judge, hat in hands, and spoke with quiet conviction. "Your Honor, my wife is one of the strongest, most capable people I have ever known. She rebuilt her business from ashes, literally. She has earned the respect of everyone in our territory, from ranchers to miners to Apache traders. Captain Morrison says the law does not allow her to hold property, but that law was written by people who never met women like Katherine Anderson. She has more right to that land than anyone, because she has proved herself worthy of it through her actions and her character. If the law says otherwise, then the law is wrong and needs to change." The judge, an older man with keen eyes and a weathered face, listened to everything with careful attention. Then he asked Katherine a series of questions about her business practices, her relationships with the Apache traders, her plans for the future. Katherine answered honestly and directly, meeting his gaze without flinching. Finally, after what felt like hours but was probably only 30 minutes, the judge rendered his decision. "It is the finding of this court that Katherine Anderson, previously Katherine Ellis, has demonstrated both the capability and the right to hold and operate the property in question. Her marriage to Xavier Anderson resolves any technical legal concerns regarding property ownership. Furthermore, this court finds that Captain Morrison's attempts to evict Mrs. Anderson were overzealous and not in keeping with the intent of territorial law, which is to protect citizens and encourage settlement, not to harass honest business owners. The property will remain in Mrs. Anderson's legal possession, jointly held with her husband as per territorial marriage statutes. Case dismissed." The sound of the gavel striking was the sweetest thing Katherine had ever heard. She turned to Xavier, who swept her into his arms right there in the courtroom, spinning her around while Walter Grant beamed and Captain Morrison stormed out in fury. "We won," Katherine breathed, still hardly believing it. "You won," Xavier corrected. "You fought for what was yours and you won." They celebrated that night in Prescott's finest hotel, a luxury they could actually afford now that the legal fees were ending, and both the ranch and trading post were thriving. Katherine wore the new dress Xavier had surprised her with, a beautiful green silk that matched her eyes, and they danced and drank champagne and felt like the luckiest people in the world. Later, in their hotel room, Xavier made love to her with a tenderness that brought tears to her eyes. "I am so proud of you," he whispered against her skin. "So proud to be your husband, your partner." "I could not have done any of this without you," Katherine replied, pulling him closer. "You saved me, Xavier, in every way a person can be saved." "No," Xavier said, pulling back to look into her eyes. "You saved yourself. I just had the good fortune to be there to help. You are the strongest person I know, Katherine Anderson. Never forget that." They returned to Chloride as heroes, greeted by cheering crowds and a celebration at the saloon that lasted well into the night. Katherine felt overwhelmed by the outpouring of support, by the realization that she had truly found her place in this rough territory. This was her home. These were her people, and nothing would ever take that away from her again. As winter settled over Arizona, bringing cooler temperatures and occasional rain, Katherine and Xavier settled into married life. They developed routines and rituals: morning coffee on the porch watching the sunrise, evening walks down to the stream, Sundays spent at the trading post doing inventory together. They argued occasionally. usually about stubborn things like whether to expand the cattle herd or how to handle a difficult supplier. But the arguments always ended with compromise, and usually with laughter. Katherine discovered she was pregnant in late February. She had suspected for a few weeks, but when the doctor in Prescott confirmed it, she felt a mixture of joy and terror that left her shaking. Xavier's reaction, when she told him that evening, was pure delight. He picked her up and spun her around, then immediately set her down gently as if she were made of glass. "Careful," Katherine laughed. "I am pregnant, not fragile. You are carrying our child," Xavier said, his voice full of wonder. "That makes you precious beyond measure." The pregnancy was not easy. Katherine had terrible morning sickness for the first few months, and the Arizona heat in the summer made her feel like she was slowly melting. But Xavier was attentive to the point of being overprotective, and Katherine had to frequently remind him that she was still capable of working and riding and living her life. Their son was born in late October of 1879, arriving after 18 hours of labor that left Katherine exhausted but triumphant. Xavier held the baby with shaking hands, staring down at the tiny red face with an expression of absolute awe. "What should we name him?" Katherine asked, watching her husband fall in love with their child. "Thomas," Xavier said immediately, "after your father, if that is all right with you." Tears streamed down Katherine's face. "That is perfect," she whispered. "Thomas Anderson, he would have been so proud." Little Thomas proved to be a healthy, loud baby who had his father's dark hair and his mother's green eyes. Katherine threw herself into motherhood with the same determination she brought to everything else, though she was grateful for Xavier's help during the sleepless nights and fussy days. They were partners in parenting as they were partners in everything, sharing the work and the joy equally. The trading post continued to thrive under Sarah Collins's management, and the Triple A ranch expanded as Xavier bought adjoining land and increased their herd. Life was not always easy. There were droughts and difficulties, cattle diseases, and the occasional clash with outlaws, but Katherine and Xavier faced everything together, their bond growing stronger with each challenge overcome. When Thomas was 2, Katherine became pregnant again. This time, she knew what to expect and weathered the pregnancy with more confidence. Their daughter, Emma, was born in the spring of 1882, a delicate-looking baby who proved to have a will of iron from her first breath. Xavier doted on both children, but there was something special about the way he looked at his daughter, as if he could not quite believe something so perfect could exist. The years flowed past in a blur of hard work and happiness. Thomas grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved books and horses in equal measure. Emma was wild and fearless, always climbing things she should not and asking questions that no one could answer. Katherine watched her children grow with a fierce pride, knowing they were being raised in a world she and Xavier had fought to build, a world where strength and determination mattered more than outdated laws and prejudice. Captain Morrison was transferred to another territory in 1883, much to everyone's relief. The new Army commander was a reasonable man who worked with the local community rather than against it, and relations between the military and the civilians of Chloride improved dramatically. Katherine eventually turned over full ownership of the trading post to Sarah Collins, selling it to her for a fair price with the understanding that it would continue to serve the community as it always had. It felt right, passing on her father's legacy to someone who would honor it, and it freed Katherine to focus on the ranch and her growing family. In 1885, when Katherine was 29 and Xavier was 33, they built a new, larger house on the ranch to accommodate their family. It was a beautiful structure with a wide porch that looked out over the valley, with enough bedrooms for the children and guest rooms for visitors. Katherine filled it with books and comfortable furniture, making it a true home. One evening, as they sat on that porch watching Thomas and Emma play in the yard while the sun set behind the mountains, Xavier took Katherine's hand. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked. "The way our life started with all that trouble and uncertainty?" Katherine thought about the question seriously. She thought about the terrified young woman who had stood in front of a burned trading post with no idea what the future held. She thought about the moment a stranger had stepped forward to defend her, changing the course of her entire life. She thought about all the hard days and harder nights, the legal battles and the fears, but also about the joy and love and partnership she had found. "No," she said finally, squeezing Xavier's hand. "Not for a moment. Everything we went through brought us here to this place, to this life. I would not change a single thing." Xavier lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. "Neither would I. You are my greatest adventure, Katherine Anderson. Every single day with you is a gift." As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky and their children's laughter echoed across the valley, Katherine leaned her head on Xavier's shoulder and felt completely at peace. She had fought for her right to stay in this wild territory, and she had won not just the legal battle but something far more valuable. She had found love and partnership, and a family that was entirely her own. The land her father had claimed, the trading post he had built, the legacy he had left behind, all of it had been worth fighting for. But the real treasure, the thing that made all the struggles worthwhile, was the man beside her and the life they had created together. In the years that followed, Katherine and Xavier would face more challenges. There would be economic downturns and natural disasters, illness and loss, the inevitable sorrows that come with a life fully lived. But they would face all of it together, their love a constant foundation that nothing could shake. Thomas would grow up to be a lawyer, inspired by Walter Grant's defense of his mother. He would spend his career fighting for the rights of women and marginalized people in the territories, carrying on the legacy of justice his parents had instilled in him. Emma would become a rancher like her father, eventually taking over the Triple and expanding it into one of the most successful operations in Arizona. She would marry a kind man who respected her fierce independence, and she would raise her own children with the same values her parents had taught her. Katherine and Xavier would live long, full lives, growing old together on the ranch they built. In their later years, sitting on that same porch watching their grandchildren play, they would tell the story of how they met, about the army captain who said Katherine had no right to stay, and the cowboy who declared she had more right than anyone. It would become a family legend, passed down through generations, a reminder that love and justice and determination could overcome any obstacle. On a warm autumn evening in 1918, Katherine Anderson, aged 62, would pass away peacefully in her sleep with Xavier holding her hand. He would follow her exactly 6 months later, unable to imagine a world without his partner, his love, his Katherine. They would be buried side by side on a hillside overlooking the valley, their graves marked with simple stones that read, Katherine Anderson, 1856–1918, she fought for her right to stay. Xavier Anderson, 1850–1919, he fought beside her. Below that, added by their children, would be the words, together always. But that was all far in the future. On this evening in 1885, Katherine and Xavier were young and strong and deeply in love, their lives stretching ahead of them full of promise and possibility. The Wild West was slowly being tamed, the territories becoming states, the lawless days giving way to civilization. But here on the Triple a ranch, The spirit of that wild time lived on in the form of a woman who had refused to be moved, and a man who had loved her for her strength. As Katherine watched her children play and felt Xavier's arm around her shoulders, she knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. The journey had been hard and the obstacles had seemed insurmountable, but she had prevailed. She had claimed her place in this harsh, beautiful land, and in doing so, she had found everything she had ever wanted and more than she had ever dreamed possible. The stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns, the cattle lowed softly in the distance, and the wind carried the scent of sage and possibility across the Arizona desert. Katherine Anderson smiled, kissed her husband's cheek, and knew that she was home. Not just in a place, but in a life she had fought for and won, surrounded by love and partnership and the promise of tomorrow. This was her legacy, not just the land or the property rights, but the proof that a woman could stand her ground, fight for what was hers, and build something lasting. Future generations of women in the territory would hear her story and know that they too had the right to stay, to fight, to claim their place in the world. And they would know that sometimes, if you were very lucky, you would find someone who would stand beside you and declare to anyone who would listen that you had more right than anyone to exist exactly as you were. Katherine had found that person in Xavier, and he had found his match in her. Together they had built not just a ranch or a business, but a partnership that would endure through all the years to come. A love story that began with defiance and bloomed into something beautiful and eternal. As the night deepened and the children finally tired themselves out, Xavier scooped Emma into his arms while Katherine took Thomas's hand, and together the family walked into their home. Behind them, the vast Arizona sky stretched endless and star-studded, a canopy over the land they had claimed and the love they had built. It was a perfect ending to a perfect day, and the promise of many more perfect days to come. Each one a gift earned through courage and love, and the simple, profound act of refusing to give up when the whole world said you had to. Katherine Anderson had fought for her right to stay, and in winning that fight, she had won everything that truly mattered.